In this chapter, we're going to look at handling exceptions. And exceptions are errors that occur in your program at runtime as opposed to compile time. You're quite familiar with compile time errors, where you type a built-in function name wrong, or leave out a semicolon, or make some sort of syntactical mistake. Those are compile time errors. Exceptions occur when something goes wrong in the more normal course of the program. The examples I'm going to show in this lesson are trying to divide by 0 and trying to access an array element that doesn't exist. In other words, you go beyond the bounds of the array. I have 3 elements in an array, and I try to access the 5th element. That leads to what's called an out-of-bounds exception. These exceptions will cause your program to crash unless you handle them using something called a try-catch statement. And that's what we're going to spend this chapter looking at, how to work with try-catch. But for now, I just want to demonstrate in this lesson a couple of examples of exceptions being thrown and what happens when they are thrown. So let's get started. We're going to call this program exceptions.java. So we'll start with trying to divide by 0. That's a very common mistake that people make. And I'll set it up by just doing a very simple program. 2 variables, numer and denom. And then we'll try to print out, display, the result of dividing numerator by denominator. And watch what happens when we do that. You see that we have an arithmetic exception, divide by 0. So again, we compiled just fine. There was no problem with the compilation. The compiler doesn't recognize a 0 denominator as being an exception. It's the runtime system that catches this error or exception and causes our program to stop with an exception being thrown. That's the terminology that we use. An exception has been thrown. So divide by 0 is one example. Let's look at another example. We'll just comment out this code. Let's create an array. Make it a very simple one. 1, 2, 3. And then let's try to print num sub 5. Notice we're only going 0, 1, and 2. Those are the only elements that we have. So 2 is our last index position. So 5 is definitely beyond the end of the array. And again, watch what happens when we compile. No problem, but when we try to run, we get an exception. So those are 2 examples of how exceptions are thrown in Java. And now what I want to do is move on to the next lesson where we're going to look at how to handle these exceptions using something called a try-catch statement.